Welcome to Chapter 11, Managing Individual Differences and Behavior, Supervising People as People. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to answer the following questions. In the hiring process, do employers care about a person's personality and individual traits? How do hidden aspects of individuals, such as their values and attitudes, affect their behavior? What are the distortions of perception that can cloud your judgment? Is it important for managers to pay attention to employee attitudes? What trends in workplace diversity should managers be aware of? What causes workplace stress, and how can it be reduced? So when we think of personality and our individual behavior, how would you describe yourself? Are you outgoing, sociable, aggressive, tense, lazy, passive, quiet? Whatever the combination of traits which result from the interaction of your genes and your environment, those make up your personality. Those are the psychological traits and behavioral attributes that give you your own unique identity. And a proactive personality is a person who is more apt to take initiative and persevere to influence the environment. We have five big personality dimensions. And in recent years, the dimensions have been distilled into a list that you can just grab in chunks. That's why we call it the Big Five. And it's currently estimated that about 76% of organizations with more than 100 employees now use some sort of pre or post hiring assessment. That also includes personality tests, and there's about $500 million that are spent each year on these services. So companies that use these tests believe that hiring decisions will be more accurate and predictive of high performers. But are they really? We'll go into this further shortly. So when we look at the dimensions that make up the Big Five, they've been associated with performance, turnover, creativity, leadership behavior, and workplace safety. We have extroversion, you're outgoing, talkative, sociable; agreeableness, you're cooperative, soft-hearted; emotional stability, you're secure, relaxed; conscientiousness is dependable, achievement-oriented; your openness to experience, you're an intellectual, imaginative, curious, broad-minded. From the textbook, do you wonder if your personality has affected your behavior at work? So if you want to know where you stand on the Big Five, you can complete self-assessment 11.1 to see where you stand. And Susan loves going to parties. I do too, depending on who's throwing the party. Where she likes to talk to everyone there. So she's probably high in emotional stability, agreeableness. What? Which of the four? If you said C, extroversion, you're absolutely correct. And you can read more about being extrovert and extroversion on page 338 in your textbook. So there are some cautions when you're using these tests in the workplace. Table 11.1 zooms in and it presents tips to help managers avoid abuses and discrimination lawsuits when using personality and psychological testing. So you should use professionals. This isn't something that you should randomly just draw down from the internet. Rely on reputable licensed psychologists for selecting and overseeing the administration, scoring, and interpretation of any of those tests. Understanding that not every psychologist is an expert at these kind of tests, so be mindful of that. Don't hire based on the personality test results alone. Don't exclude just based on those either. Supplement any personality data that you receive from a test with information from reference checks, personal interviews, ability tests, job performance records, and make sure that you avoid hiring on the basis of specified personality profiles. The reason why I say don't exclude based on that is because someone's personality may just be different than yours. Now, if someone's personality test is telling you that they're a psychopath, then okay, yeah, you may want to reconsider. But just being mindful that it's just letting you know about a person's personality. Be alert for gender, racial, and ethnic bias. Regularly assess any possible adverse impact of those tests when you're hiring or interviewing women and minorities. And graphology tests don't work. Integrity tests do. So personality tests and aptitudes can't be inferred based on a person's penmanship. Like that just does not work. But a dishonest job applicant can often be screened through an integrity test. A person who's not conscientious can't fake that, right? Reportedly. I don't know how far along the scale of psychopathy. Okay, me and my $30 words. How wide on the scale psychologically one could say that a person could potentially pretend it, fake it enough. But reportedly, it's not something you can fake. So when we look at our core self-evaluations, looking deep within ourselves, you have to be aware as a manager of these personality traits to understand how they play into workplace behavior. We're going to go into greater detail of each of the four, but it's self-efficacy, self-esteem, locus of control, and emotional stability. And under self-efficacy, it's your belief in your ability to do a task. Learned helplessness is a debilitating lack of faith in your ability to control the environment, and it's associated with low efficacy. Among the implications for managers are the ability to assign jobs accordingly. Complex, challenging, and autonomous jobs tend to enhance your perception of your self-efficacy. If the jobs are boring or tedious, it usually does the opposite. One way that we can help to develop self-efficacy is understanding that it's nurtured. And someone that is low on that scale needs a lot of constructive pointers and positive feedback. And goal difficulty needs to match their perceived level of self-efficacy. But goals can be made more challenging as their performance improves. So small successes need to be rewarded. It needs to be a layering effect. And a person's expectations can be improved through various guided experiences, mentoring, and role modeling. When we look at self-esteem, it's the extent to which we like or dislike ourselves. If you have high self-esteem, you're more apt to handle failure better, you emphasize the positive, and you take more risks. Person with lower self-esteem is going to focus more on their weaknesses. They'll be more dependent on others. Some ways that you can boost employee self-esteem as a manager is reinforce their positive attributes and skills, provide positive feedback whenever possible, break larger projects into smaller tasks and projects. If you look at a pizza, someone can't pick up the whole pizza and take, one big bite. You have to cut it into slices and then eat those individual slices. Well, that's what you do with larger projects. With a person who has, self-esteem issues. That way, as they complete each slice of the pizza, they see how they're succeeding along the way. Expressing confidence in their abilities to complete their task and providing coaching when they're struggling to complete a task. Locus of control indicates how much you believe that you control your fate through your own efforts. Research shows that internals and externals have important workplace differences, And internals exhibit less anxiety, greater work motivation, and stronger expectations that effort leads to performance. They also obtain higher salaries, and most importantly, your internal locus of control can be improved if you're provided more job autonomy, more ability to have a say in decisions. When we look at the case of emotional stability, it's the extent to which we feel secure and unworried, and to which we are likely to experience negative emotions under pressure. And so people with low levels of emotional stability are prone to anxiety. They have a negative view of the world, whereas people with high levels tend to show better job performance. So, how have you reacted to a boss or a teacher who seemed to have low emotional stability? Right? Low levels. Remember, you're prone to anxiety, negative view of the world. Have you ever had an experience with that? I'm really trying to think of any boss or instructor from my past that I can think of. I'm sure there probably was someone, but I just can't think of them now. um, hmm. I'm gonna have to really think about that one. Yeah, I can't really think off the top of my mind. Most of the people that I can think of, um, well, I know of some that have this possibility that are prone to anxiety, but whether or not they have a negative viewpoint of the world is not necessarily the case. They're usually um, high performance driven. When we look at our EI, which is our emotional intelligence, it's been defined as the ability to carry out accurate reasoning about emotions and the ability to use emotions and emotional knowledge to enhance thought. Recent research underscores the importance of developing higher EI, but it does not confirm the lofty expectations that were initially introduced in 1909, where some claim it to be the secret elixir to happiness and higher performance. Um, it was moderately associated with better social relations, well being, satisfaction, higher creativity, better emotional control. And interesting enough, it was not found to be a driver of supervisory ratings of performance as initially thought. So some of the traits of EI include self-awareness. It's the most essential trait. It's your ability to read your own emotions and gauge your moods accurately so you know how you're affecting other people. Self-management is your ability to control your emotions and act with honesty and integrity in reliable and adaptable ways, right? So you can leave the occasional bad mood outside of the office. You don't bring what's happening at home or what happened on the highway into the office. Social awareness is your ability to be empathetic and show others that you care, and have an intuition as far as your play within an organization, and so that you understand how your emotions can affect others. And relationship management is the ability to communicate clearly and convincingly, your ability to disarm conflicts and build stronger personal bonds. Now, here's this. There we go. OB, organizational behavior. I love this field. It is really dedicated to better understanding and managing people at work. If you look at a company's annual report or brochure from its corporate communications department, you most likely will be given a picture of its formal aspects, the goals, policies, hierarchy, and structure. But could you exert effective leadership if the formal aspects were all you knew about the company? All you knew was that, is it possible for you to effectively lead? But what about the informal aspects, the values and attitudes, personalities, perceptions, conflicts, culture? Clearly, you need to know about these hidden characteristics that are most likely can be deemed as messy characteristics, right? Because it's now dealing with the human element. And so when you have the balance of the two come together for you to really look at the interdisciplinary field that is known as organizational behavior. Oops, excuse me. Now, under values and attitudes, your values are abstract ideals that guide your thinking and behavior across all situations. Job satisfaction is moderately associated with performance and strongly related to turnover, and unhappy workers are less likely to demonstrate high performance, while happy workers are less likely to quit. This is why it's important for managers to track employees' attitudes and to understand their causes. Well, what are their attitudes? It's your learned predisposition toward a given object. It directly influences our behavior. So your values are something that are usually taught, embedded in you from your childhood, from those that have within your circle of influence. So from your religious institution, from your family and neighborhood. And so you now have this abstract viewpoint, and then your attitude is something that directly then influences your behavior. So when we look at the components of attitudes, we have affective, cognitive, and behavioral. Affective is I feel, it's your feelings or emotions about a situation, and cognitive is I believe, it's the beliefs and knowledge that you have about that situation, and behavioral is how you intend or expect to behave towards a situation. All three of these components are manifested at any given time. And so if, for instance, you call a corporation and you get one of those telephone tree menus for customer service, press 1, for human resources, press 4, whatever, that they never seem to connect you to a human being. You might be so irritated while holding the phone that you would say, I hate being given the runaround. That's an expression of your feelings. It's affective. Or you may say, that company doesn't know how to take care of its customers. This is based on your perception. That's your cognitive component. It's what you believe. And a third thing you may say is, I'll never call them again. That expresses your intention. That's your behavior, how you, what you plan to do from that point forward based on the situation that you were faced with. So when you say, for instance, I am never going to eat at this restaurant again, what are the 4 components is that reflecting? Is it reflecting the behavioral component of an attitude, decisional, cognitive, or affective? If you said A, behavioral, you're correct. You can find more about that on page 345 in your textbook. So cognitive dissonance. In 1957, Leon Festinger, a psychologist, and his associates penetrated a cult whose members predicted that most people on Earth would perish in a cataclysmic event, except for a handful who would be rescued by aliens in a flying saucer. Festinger found himself standing with cult members on a hilltop awaiting the event, which of course never happened. Later, he proposed the term cognitive dissonance to explain how they rationalized the failure of their prophecy. So, it's the psychological discomfort that you experience between your cognitive attitude and the incompatible behavior. Incompatible. Excuse me, all these words and I'm getting tongue-tied. I'm thinking incomparable. So how you sit back and you just have to explain it away. You have to rationalize it. And as the saying goes, rationalize is to tell, rationalize. How people deal with this discomfort depends on the importance, the control, or the rewards. Can they live with the ambiguity of this level? of this uncertainty. How much control do they have over the situation, and what rewards are at stake with the dissonance? And depending on those three is how well someone can deal with it. If um, if the rewards of if there's no rewards in saying we were wrong, if there's absolutely no rewards, if it's pure just humiliation, someone, it will flip and turn and find every way to rationalize why they weren't rescued by aliens. So think about this. Have you ever observed people that employed this mechanism when the surefire thing they predicted did not occur? Think about this. Y2K. Remember, we were going to transition from 1999 to 2000, and it was supposed to be a cataclysmic event. Everything was just supposed to come crashing down. It forced people to go to all the different retailers and the grocery stores, clean off shelves. I remember I had a friend. She had stored up so much stuff that I'm sure she probably still has stuff now. And it was just really just mind-boggling that people really thought that everything would just crash with the moment of you going from 1999 and switching over to 2000. Something else is all the different times where the end of the world has been predicted and never came to pass, and you have people literally who find a way to rationalize it each and every time. So a lot of things have to do with our perception and how we process, how we interpret and understand our environment. And the process of perception is complex, but it can be boiled down to 4 steps. And I'm going to zoom in so we can look closer at these 4. The first is selective attention. Did I notice something? In this book, we're less concerned about, or the authors are less concerned about the theoretical steps in perception than in how perception's distorted. Since this has considerable bearing on the manager's judgment in the job, so in any one of the 4 stages of the perception process, misunderstandings or errors in judgment can actually occur. And those errors can lead to mistakes that can be damaging to you, other people in the organization. So being mindful of, when you look at the selective attention, did I notice something? Which would, of course, mean that you'd have to be intentional in understanding and acknowledging if you did. The second would be interpretation and evaluation. What was it I noticed, and what does it mean? The third would be to store it in your memory. Remember it as an event, concept, person, or all 3. And then the 4th is retrieving from memory to make judgments and decisions. What do I recall about that? You can see where there could be some misunderstandings or errors in judgment with this, because your perception can definitely be distorted. Through the distortion, one major thing that is always at the very top of that is stereotyping, and there's various ways in which we stereotype. So if you're a tall African American man, do people make remarks about you being a basketball player? Right? You must be an athlete, basketball player. If you're of Irish descent, do people think you drink a lot? And they ask you about leprechauns, right? If you're Jewish, do people think you're money oriented? Or do they somehow, they want to always talk to you about whether or not your grandparents were part of the Holocaust? If you're a woman, do people think you're automatically nurturing? You must be a good mother, or you must be a good cook. All of these things are stereotypes. Not the part about the Holocaust, of course, but as far as being money-oriented, people make an assumption, and this is a stereotype that's tied to Jewish people as being very money-hungry. Stereotypes can be very misleading and extremely dangerous, and managers need to be aware of potential stereotypes and do their best to avoid them. You can look at sex role stereotypes. Research revealed that men were preferred for male-dominated jobs. Women have harder time being perceived as effective leaders. It'll be a while before the world actually understands that women can lead just as effectively as men can. Something else is with age stereotypes. For whatever reason, we inaccurately believe that older workers are less motivated, less trusting, less healthy. Doesn't matter how much research refutes it, people still believe it. And with race stereotypes, their studies have demonstrated that people of color experience more perceived discrimination and less psychological support than whites. So, in what ways have you been unfairly stereotyped in your own life? And what was the impact? I'd love to hear about that. I know that as a woman and as a Black woman, I've been put in so many different stereotype boxes. It's just laughable. I may actually write a book about it. So another distortion is our implicit bias. It's an attitude or belief that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. There's a conversation about implicit bias where it's a very difficult one, especially when we talk about it in a classroom, because people's emotions can run high and politics can enter the conversation. So the best way to have the conversation is simply to acknowledge that implicit bias is substantiated by academic literature, right? It does exist. So when we say, I really don't think I'm biased, but I just have feelings about some people, that's bias. 85% of Americans consider themselves to be unprejudiced, but researchers conclude that most hold some degree of implicit racial bias. It's been at the forefront of public discussion in 2016. And it's just really sad that people don't understand really what bias is and how we all have it. We all have some level of prejudice in us. And so one way that you can, move forward on the conversation, have some great dialogue, is to take the conversation as far as you're comfortable with and requiring some kind of intergroup contact, positive feedback, and some clear norms of behavior. There is a YouTube video that I'm going to share with you guys. There's two of them, very short. One's 2 minutes, one's 3, that helps to define implicit bias and racial anxiety, and the other one's about subconscious racial bias in children. It's very interesting. We also have what's called a halo effect. And with that, it's when you form an impression of an individual based on one single trait. And you believe that's all you need to know. And if as if we needed additional proof that life is unfair, it's been shown that attractive people generally are treated better than unattractive people. Attractive members of Congress get more TV coverage, and attractive political candidates win more often. More often. It's not saying all the time, because we've had some that are not deemed attractive, right? But more often. If you think about some of our modern day presidents, they were deemed attractive. You look at Kennedy, Obama, Clinton, even George Bush Sr. and Jr. There's a level of attractiveness. Definitely Kennedy and Obama and Clinton. Something else that has been studied is the fact that attractive students have higher expectations by teachers in terms of their academic achievement. Isn't that interesting? And attractive employees are generally paid higher salaries than unattractive ones. And attractive CEOs are paid more than less appealing CEOs. Male CEOs also tend to be taller. They're usually 6 feet compared to an average man who is 5 feet 10.5 inches. That was conducted by a Swedish study. Clearly, however, if a manager fails to look at all of an individual's traits, he or she has no right to complain if the employee doesn't work out. So, your call. Are you influenced in your judgment of people by how attractive they are? Do you think as a manager you could look beyond someone's physical appearance to be a good judge of their competence? Why? Do we have this distortion in perception? Interesting enough, when we see an athlete, and if that athlete is attractive, do we naturally assume that that athlete is also talented in their sport? I'd say we do. So, the recency effect. It's a tendency to remember recent information better than earlier information. And some examples of that could be that you recently made a mistake and it ends up being the only topic of performance review. Or your evaluation from your professor may be affected by course activity closer to the time of a formal appraisal. And your and that's a big one right there. You could have had really no issues with your professor for the bulk of a semester or term. However, the professor graded you low on something and now you're upset. And so your way of unknowingly and knowingly retaliating is to now give that professor a low course evaluation. So now you've rated this professor over the entire time that they've taught you, but yet you're rating them not over the full length of the term. You're rating them based on one affected period of time. Another example would be that some stock market investors leap into holdings that are doing well and then cash out investments that are doing poorly. But while doing so, they're ignoring whatever the trends are. So think about yourself. Why does the recency effect occur? Just looking at your own self, if you'd like. Like other habits, it makes things easier. Because it's easier, we're more inclined to use our own recent experience as the baseline for what will happen in the future. So could you guys admit to making any decisions that were influenced by the recency effect? Have any of you poorly rated a instructor or because of one instance? Now, causal attributions. Two tendencies that distort an individual's interpretation of behavior are fundamental attribution bias, which occurs when people attribute another person's behavior to his or her personal characteristics rather than a situational factor. And then self-serving bias occurs when people take more personal responsibility for success than for failure. Now, causal attributions are when we infer causes for observed behavior. We're going to say that based on what we see, these are the reasons behind it. So let me give you an example of a fundamental attribution bias. A study of manufacturing employees found that top managers attributed the cause of industrial back pain to individuals, whereas workers attribute it to the environment. Now, listen to that again. A study of manufacturing employees found that top managers said that the reason that their workers had back pain, industrial back pain, was because of the people. Something they did wrong. Yet the workers are saying, no, it's the environment that we're in. That's what's causing us the pain. That is fundamental. That is fundamental attribution. You're focusing on characteristics rather than situational factors. Now, self-serving bias. Europeans blamed Wall Street for the 2010 economic collapse in Greece. However, Wall Street Journal did an article and they pointed out that a close look at Greece's finances over 10 years since it adopted the euro shows, that's their monetary instrument. We have the dollar, they have the euro. Shows that not only Greece was the principal author of its debt problems, so they were the generator of their own problems, but that also that their neighboring European governments that were part of the EU repeatedly turned a blind eye to it's just flouting of the rules. It's just ignoring what was going on. So you are more willing to take responsibility for success than for failure. So Europeans wanted to blame Wall Street for Greece's collapse when the EU needs to take responsibility for the role that they played. Had nothing to do with Wall Street, right? Now, under self-fulfilling prophecy, this is a lesson for you as a manager. When you expect employees to perform badly, they probably will. And when you expect them to perform well, they probably will. It's a phenomenon where your expectations of yourself or others lead them to behave in ways that make those expectations come true. And your expectations can powerfully influence behavior and performance. Research has shown that by raising your expectations for individuals performing a wide variety of tasks, higher levels of achievement and productivity can be achieved. So, what can you do? Create positive performance expectations. Recognize that everyone has the potential to increase in performance. Introduce new employees as if they have outstanding potential. Encourage employees to visualize successful execution of tasks and help people master key skills. So John's interviewing Bambi for a job opening at his accounting firm, and he notices that she has several tattoos visible on both arms. He does not believe that people with tattoos can be good accountants. So what is John engaging in? Counseling, stereotyping, behavioral interviewing, or situational interviewing? If you said B, stereotyping, you are correct. Work-related attitudes and behaviors tied to employee engagement. There's a quote that we often hear: keep the employees happy. That's not what we hear in most companies. We usually hear keep the customer happy, but in some healthy companies, we'll hear keep the employees happy. It's true that attitudes are important. The reason being is that attitudes affect behavior, but is keeping employees happy all that managers need to know to get results? And when you look at employee engagement, it's an individual's involvement, its satisfaction, enthusiasm for work. And when an employee is engaged, there's a feeling of urgency and intensity, enthusiasm for the job they're doing. There's greater focus, and they're more committed to the job and the company. Employees more likely will be engaged with culture promotes employee development, recognition, and trust. And we discuss motivation for performance in the next chapter, in chapter 12. And here we'll consider what managers need to know about key work-related attitudes and behaviors. There's 3 types of attitudes that managers are particularly interested in, and that is employee engagement, job satisfaction, and organizational commitment. The U.S. workforce displays above average global levels of engagement, according to a consulting firm, Aon Hewitt. The firm's 15-year study of engagement showed that worldwide levels at 62% in comparison to a North American rate of 66% of levels of engagement within organizations, within the workforce. So when we look at job satisfaction, it's much higher today. It's better, of course, than in the aftermath of the Great Recession. At that time, Americans were forced to work longer hours and often for the same or less pay, and many struck back by suing employers for violating wage and hour laws and by forcing them to work off clock without overtime pay. Job satisfaction is the extent to which you feel positively or negatively about various aspects of your work. And it depends on how you feel about, work, your pay, promotions, coworkers, and supervision. There's some key correlates such as stronger motivation, life satisfaction, tardiness, turnover, stress. Reportedly, only about 48.3% of U.S. workers were satisfied with their jobs in 2015, which was down from 61% in 1987. According to a study of about 5,000 households, this is what was concluded. But there was also another survey that found that employee job satisfaction in 2015 was 88%, which was down from a high of 86% in 2009. However, it was up from a low of 77% in 2002. So, of course, you have different kinds of surveys and studies that go around, and it gives you a kind of a viewpoint, an overview of what people feel and how they see their work and their role in it. So our commitment to our organizations, it reflects to what point we identify with the organization and how committed we are to helping it achieve its goals. And research shows that a significant positive relationship between organizational commitment and job satisfaction, performance, turnover, and organizational citizenship behavior. So if managers are able to increase job satisfaction, then employees may show higher levels of commitment, which in turn can elicit higher performance and lower employee turnover. Why, as a manager, do you need to learn how to manage individual differences? It's simple. So that you can influence employees to do their best work. We can evaluate performance and do so by looking at these 4 key areas. When we look at performance and productivity, every job has certain expectations. Some are easier to define than others. So when you think about telemarketing sales reps, how many contacts should they make in a day? How many sales should that person close? That's performance and productivity evaluated. When we look at absenteeism, of course, people are going to get sick. People are going to get ill. There's going to be deaths in the family. Someone's going to have to be out for jury duty. There's so many different legitimate reasons for being out. However, there's a lot of no-show behavior that's related to job dissatisfaction, and absenteeism may be a precursor to turnover. For a high turnover, low-paying job, which is usually under $30,000 a year, the Center for American Progress estimates that the cost to replace an employee is 16% of that person's salary. For a mid-range position, which is between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, that cost is 20% of the salary. And then when you have a highly educated executive position where they're making $100,000 a year, the cost to replace that employee is 213% of the salary. You see the jump? Now, when we look at organizational citizenship behaviors, according to one description, such gestures as constructive statements about the department, expressions of personal interest in the work of others, suggestions for how to improve, training new people, respect for the spirit as well as the letter of housekeeping rules, care for organizational property, punctuality, and attendance well beyond the standard or enforceable levels. Those are all deemed organizational citizenship behaviors, right? There's a long laundry list of others that you can consider. Now, what is considered a counterproductive work behavior? That includes being tardy and absent a lot, right? Drug and alcohol abuse, any kind of disciplinary problems, but also you can look at accidents, sabotage, sexual harassment, theft, white collar crime, violence. Um, it was a survey that shows that about 96% of workers say they have experienced uncivil behavior, and 98% have actually witnessed it. That's a lot. So Herman spends his lunch hour drinking beer in his car in the parking lot. Not sure why, but that's what Herman wants to do. Is this an example of evaluating behavior, discerning, counterproductive work, destructive work behavior? Which of the four is it? Herman wants to sit back and drink a brew in the car in the parking lot at work. If you said C, counterproductive work behavior, you are correct. A diversified workforce. Let's be clear that diversity is not synonymous with differences. Rather, it encompasses both differences and similarities. So this means as a manager, you need to manage both of those simultaneously. So diversity represents all the ways that people are unlike and alike. And so you're looking at the differences and similarities in our gender, our age, our sexual orientation, religion, race, capabilities, and our social economic background. You're looking at the whole thing. So you're looking, once again, I'm going to use my pizza reference. You're not just looking at the pepperoni on the pizza. You're looking at the entire pizza. If it's got mushrooms, if it's got olives, if it's got bell peppers, whatever it has on it, the cheese, and it's got stuffed crust cheese in it, like whatever, you're having to look at everything. And then if you're noticing that pizza has all the works on it, but then you have another pizza that's just a cheese pizza, it doesn't mean that cheese pizza is not delicious, is not good. It just is different, right? So there is a video that is about almost 3 minutes that was done, and it's on YouTube, that is about diversity that I want to be able to show you guys as well. Now, I'm going to zoom in because this is a figure 11.3 and it shows you the diversity wheel. And to help distinguish the important ways in which people differ, diversity experts Lee Gardenswartz and Anita Rowe have identified this wheel. And there's 4 layers of diversity. The internal dimensions are those human differences that exert a powerful, sustained effect throughout every stage of our lives that include our age and race and gender, physical ability, sexual orientation. And then we go in externally, and you see that it consists of personal characteristics that we acquire, we modify, we discard throughout our lives. That can be our marital status, our parental status, religion, income, work experience, personal habits, our appearance. And then when we look at our organizational dimensions, those also include management status, seniority, work location, division or department that we work in. So those are the 3 that you see. So the trends that we have, and I'm going to narrow this back down, in workforce diversity. The median age of Americans is 37.8 years. That's the oldest in our history. So 38% of employees are now older than their boss. That's interesting. Gender, many more women now work compared to the 1960s. We now make up 46.8% of the workforce, but overall we still earn only 79 cents to every dollar for a man, and that's based on white women. When you talk about African American and Latino women, other women of color, that number is considerably less. Now, when we look at race and ethnicity, whites are projected to change from 77.5% in 2014 to 68.5% in 2060. African Americans from 13.2% to 14.3%. Asians from 5.4% to 9.3%. Hispanics and Latinos from 17.4% to 28.6%. And American Indian, Alaskan Natives from 1.2% to 1.5%. And that's where you're looking at the U.S. population and how it's becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. When we look at sexual orientation, despite the changing social and legal landscape, over 53%, it's over half, of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender workers, LGBT, which will now also include Q, will nationwide said that they hide who they are at work, according to a 2014 report. Despite the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1992, disabled people have difficulty finding work. And the Census Bureau found less than half, at 41.1%, of disabled people ages 21 to 64 were employed, compared to 79.1% of abled people. Let's see. And about 20% of civilian Americans have a physical or mental disability. When we look at educational levels, it mismatches between education and workforce needs, and about 500,000 college graduates are working minimum wage jobs. That's 260,000 people with bachelor's degrees and 200,000 people with associate's degrees. Now, there are some barriers to diversity that takes place in organizations. Stereotypes and prejudices are major ones. There are some that have been erected by diverse people themselves. And in the main, however, most barriers are put in the past by organizations. And when we speak of those barriers, we're of course referring to the people in the organization, especially those who may have been there for a while and they're resistant to making it more diverse. They're resistant to change. In general, is an attitude that all managers come up against from time to time, and resistance to diversity is simply one variation of that resistance to change. People don't like change. People change only when they see a true benefit. So there's a fear of discrimination against majority group members. There's resistance to diversity program priorities, a negative diversity climate, lack of support for family demands, a hostile work environment for diverse employees. Can you identify with any of these barriers to diversity? And have you experienced or witnessed barriers like these at work or at school? Something to share. I'd like to hear how you would recommend removing these barriers. Feel free to send me an email. Let me know your recommendation. So stress. Oh, this is a big one. That's the tension that we all feel, right? We're trying to balance everything, and there's so much uncertainty. There was a study that was conducted in 2015 by the American Psychological Association that found that parents, younger generations, and those living in households making less than $50,000 a year reported higher levels of stress than Americans overall, especially when it came to money. And those who had particularly high stress about money are more likely to say they engage in unhealthy behaviors to manage their stress. It's a given. There's no question that work is stressful. There is another study in 2015 that found that the top two sources of stress are money and work. 67% rated money and 65% rated work. And more adults are reporting that they're facing extreme stress, with 24% saying that they're highly stressed in 2015 compared to 18% who were reporting in the year prior in 2014. A commonly cited cause of work stress includes low salaries. 54% stated that low salaries was a major driver of their work stress. Lack of opportunities for growth and advancement was at 53%. Lack of recognition, also 53%. And dissatisfaction with their work-life balance practices that their company provided. The American Institute of Stress estimates that workplace stress costs the U.S. economy over $300 billion with a B a year in healthcare, missed work, and stress reduction treatment. Stress can cause conflicts at work, make you feel fatigued all the time, and generate problems such as backaches, insomnia, chest pain, headaches, and a litany of other symptoms. So let's look at some of the sources for job-related stress. The type A personality, right? It's an individual difference. Some people are born warriors. They worry about everything, and those genes, those with a gene mutation known as BDNF, the Yale researchers identify that are people who with chronically obsess over negative thoughts. Others are impatient, hurry, deadline-ridden, competitive types with the personality characteristics that I just mentioned, the type A. They're so involved in a chronic, determined struggle to accomplish more in less time, and this causes more stress. So you have those who worry too much, and you have those who are highly competitive and impatient. Then we have our individual task demands. It's the job itself, and some occupations are more stressful than others. When you look at this list that was done in 2014, it was they had senior corporate executives, when the list looked at the most stressful jobs. In 2014, CareerCast did this ranking, and senior corporate executives were ranked number 7, the most stressful jobs. Low-level jobs can be more stressful than high-level jobs because why? The employee often has less control over their lives, and because of that, they have less work satisfaction. When you're on the bottom of the rung, you don't get to have a say. You don't have the autonomy to make the decisions and decide you're going to leave work early, and you don't need permission to do so. There's so much the demands and restrictions that are placed on you the lower you are on that ladder. When we look at role overload, that occurs when others' expectations exceed your ability. And role conflict occurs when you feel torn by the different expectations of important people in your life. Role ambiguity occurs when others' expectations are unknown. It's just like a gray space. You have no clue. Group demands are when people just don't get along. They can just stress you out. On the flip side of that is even if you have stress under control, a coworker's stress might actually bother you, which could reduce your productivity. Under organizational demands, that's when an organization culture promotes high pressure work demands. That helps to fuel the stress response. And non-work demands are when you're having to deal with innumerable situations in your own personal life, and so that adds to your overall stress. So your personal life is stressful, and it just adds to the overall stress that you already are faced with. So your boss expects you to stay late to cover a workload of a coworker who's out sick, but you're supposed to help your mom with some work on her house tonight. What are you suffering from? Is it role overload, role conflict, role ambiguity, or burnout? If you said B, role conflict, you're correct. You can see that on page 365. You have a conflict between the two roles that you're playing, personal as well as professional. Now, symptoms of stress. Here's 4. Negative stress reveals itself in 3 kinds of symptoms that can lead to burnout. Our physiological is our backaches, headaches, sweaty palms, nausea. The psychological is boredom, anxiety, depression. Behavioral could be alcohol or drug abuse, sleeplessness. And burnout is your state of mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. You're overstressed. You're just overstressed. So oftentimes you call out sick, you miss deadlines, you take longer lunch breaks. You're indifferent to performance. You're just burnt. You're just you've burnt in both ends of the candle, and there's just nowhere for you to go. You just don't know what to do. So how can an organization help to reduce stressors? They can create buffers that that you can help to reduce burnout. And there are all kinds of buffers or administrative changes that you can use, such as extra staff or equipment at peak periods, increased freedom to make decisions, recognition for accomplishments, time off for rest or personal development, assignments to a new position, have a 3 to 5 day employee retreat in an offsite location to have some relaxation and team building activities. You can do a sabbatical leave program to help replenish employees' energy and desire to work. You can provide career counseling, create supportive environments, have a holistic wellness approach. So many different ways that you can come up with to help reduce stress. And that is the end of chapter 11. If you have any questions, please email me. Thank you.